Matthew chapter 5. While you're turning, let me just mention that though not every name or need gets mentioned in our prayer time, always recognize that there's members of our own body that are hurting and sometimes going through difficult decisions and dark tunnels, and the fact of the matter is we can be faithful to pray for one another whether we know what's going on in somebody's life or not. And I want to encourage all of us to try to be sensitive to that, and especially sensitive to God's Spirit to respond when He lays somebody on our heart. Matthew chapter 5 and verse number 1. All right, Matthew chapter 5 and verse number 1. And seeing the multitudes, he went up into a mountain, and when he was set, his disciples came unto him, and he opened his mouth and taught them, saying, Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Now, we're going to deal with this particular beatitude tonight, but let me remind all of us, we spent some weeks making sure that we were all on the same mindset here. God has a kingdom, or let's say it like this: there's a kingdom over which God is sovereign, and no one can take that kingdom down. No one can overturn that, and it is an eternal kingdom. And we know that there's a kingdom coming to this earth under the reign of Jesus Christ, but make no mistake about it, He's still Lord right now. He's still King of Kings right now. God is still sovereign. And the Sermon on the Mount is particularly about what God's kingdom looks like among men. And let me just tell you, it's full of paradoxes. Raise your hand if you know what a paradox is. All right, a paradox is a truth that seems backwards. Doesn't seem like that's the way it is. But God's kingdom is so different than what we understand from this world that much of what Jesus says here goes directly against the grain of our own natural earthly understanding. And we get into those kind of things like when we say, blessed are they that mourn, for they shall be comforted. So the happy people are the mourners. That sounds backwards. The happy people are those that are poor in spirit. That doesn't seem right. The happy people are the persecuted people. How is that the case? Well, we're talking about apples and oranges here. We're talking about God's kingdom versus man's understanding. And so there's a lot of paradox that's going on here, but they work perfectly in the mind of God, and that's where we're trying to get to, is to have the mind of Christ in and of ourselves. So here's the one we're looking at tonight. Blessed are the poor in spirit. Blessed are the poor in spirit. The poor in spirit is a terminology that's used in the Old Testament, and the principle of it is not unfamiliar to Old Testament hearers. When the disciples sat down in front of Jesus and He tells them, blessed are the poor in spirit, this isn't brand new terminology to them. They understand what somebody poor in spirit would be like. As a matter of fact, let's look at a couple Old Testament scriptures tonight, and I want you to see what the Bible has to say about this. Look at Isaiah chapter 57, if you would please. Isaiah chapter 57. Isaiah chapter 57 and verse number 15. This is what Isaiah says. For thus saith the high and lofty one, capital O, one, that's God. For thus saith the high and lofty one that inhabiteth eternity, whose name is holy. I dwell in the high and holy place, with him also that is of a contrite and humble spirit, to revive the spirit of the humble and to revive the heart of the contrite ones. Now, the word humble shouldn't be a new word to us. We know what humility is, or at least I hope as a child of God, we understand humility and what it is. And there's been a lot of definitions given for humility. One preacher said humility is not thinking less of yourself. It's more like this, not thinking of yourself at all. That's not a horrible definition of humility. We're told in the New Testament, we're told to not think more highly of ourselves than we ought to think. We're told that God resisteth the proud, but He gives grace to the humble. We're told that if we humble ourselves in the sight of God, that He will lift us up. And Isaiah gives us this truth here, that God has two dwelling places. There's two places that can boast or claim the presence of God, and one is a high and holy place. We know that there is a literal place called heaven that is the abode of God, and it's a perfect place, and it's a pure place, and it's a holy place, and it's the place where God resides. But Isaiah says God dwells in a high and holy place, but He's got another home, if you will, and that is with Him that is of a humble and contrite heart. If the only place God ever lived was a high and holy place, you and I would be out of luck today as far as experiencing the presence of God. But if we will humble ourselves, and if we will be voluntarily contrite, contrite's not a word we use every day, so let me help us with that. Contrite means ground to powder. It means broken into pieces. Contrition is when we empty ourselves completely and we have nothing left. And Isaiah here says that God also lives with him that is of a humble and a contrite spirit. All right, now we're not talking about something that is necessarily visible on the outside. We'll get to that in just a moment. But we're talking about the spirit of a man, his spiritual condition. And what God is saying here in Isaiah chapter 57 is that God lives in a high and holy place, and then He lives in empty earthly tabernacles. He doesn't move in and fill His presence in lives that are already full. But if we'll empty ourselves out, then we can know the presence of God. God's not asking us to do anything that Jesus didn't do when He came to earth. Jesus emptied Himself. He left a throne in heaven, and he voluntarily came meek and lowly and humble. If you need more details about that, don't go any further than Philippians chapter 2, verse 5, and read on. That tells us about that Jesus being equal with God, He thought it not robbery to be equal with God, but He made Himself of no reputation and took upon Him the form of a servant and was made in the likeness of man, and being found in fashion as a man, He humbled Himself and became obedient unto death, even the death of the cross. The full out emptying of Himself to become man and then to experience the worst of humanity. That's what Jesus did for us. And so now Jesus says, look, if you want to know the fullness of my presence, you're going to have to do like Christ did, and you're going to have to empty yourself out spiritually. And it literally means something like this on a spiritual level, being bankrupt before God. In our spiritual case, it is coming before God and saying, God, without you, I have nothing. God, I am poor in spirit. I'm not operating here on my own will, on my own determination, on my own strength. There was some realization of that when God had to stir up Zerubbabel to rebuild the house of God in the Old Testament. And you might remember the prophet had come along and say this, it's not by might nor by power, but by my Spirit, saith the Lord. Jesus said it like this, without me, ye can do nothing. Without me, ye can do nothing. So here's what that means. It means that as we're going through this life, there are times that we think we have something. I mean, we think we're going to help God out. We think we can face the issues of life, and every now and then we have to go to God and get His help. Are we listening to what we're saying right here? That every now and then we need God's help? You know what? I've never liked this. Since I was a kid and I've seen this, it has always just fell on my spirit in a hard way. But it's when I'm driving down the road and I see a bumper sticker on the back of somebody's car. And by the way, I didn't look through the parking lot tonight to see if you have this bumper sticker. But if you do, I'm glad I haven't seen it. God is my co-pilot. Friend, if God's your co-pilot, you're in the wrong seat. What do we think we're going to do? Handle the plane and every now and then turn it over to Him when we're flying through a storm or something like that? That's not what He wants for our life. There was an old-time preacher named Leonard Ravenhill who said this. He said, in a message, he said, some of you right now think you're doing pretty well because you're driving with Jesus by your side in the passenger seat of your car. But he said, if you want to know how the Christian life is really supposed to work, here's what you need to do. You need to get out of the driver's seat, leave the keys in the ignition, go around, open the trunk, get in, close the door, and say, Jesus, you're driving. Let's go wherever you want to go. Poor in spirit means I'm nothing without you. I'm empty. Without you, I have no joy. The moment we start finding joys in the things of this world, we're headed toward a lack of happiness, I promise you that. We're headed toward disappointment. We're headed toward discouragement. You know why? Because as soon as we think we find something of value and satisfaction in this world, it will turn to dust in our hand. It is temporal. It is not eternal. It won't last. It will leave us empty and often will destroy us in the process. And so what Jesus is saying here is, here's what I want you to understand, that the life that I expect you to live is one of spiritual emptiness. I want you to empty out yourself. He says it in different words in another part of his lessons. He says it like this: if any man come after me, let him deny himself, take up his cross, and follow me. Remember, the cross is an instrument of death. He's talking about self-sacrifice and self-denial. And here's the paradox of it. If you want to find out how much your life is really worth, then consider your life worthless. That's a paradox, isn't it? But here's what it is. It's a realization of a level of dependency upon Him. The truth is, your life is worth a whole lot to God. But it only truly experiences and realizes its value when it is fully in the hands of the Master. As long as we're in control and as long as we think we've got it all together, in Philippians chapter 3, if we ever get to the point where we think that we have apprehended, then we're in trouble. But Paul said, I count as dung the things that I might have whereof to gain from. I consider them dung that I may win Christ. What's he talking about? He's saying making himself of no reputation, just like Jesus did, becoming a servant and being poor in spirit. We looked at Isaiah chapter 57, Isaiah chapter 66, and for sake of time, I'm just going to read these. If you want to jot down a reference and check it out later, I fully encourage you to do that. But Isaiah chapter 66, verse 1, thus saith the Lord, the heaven is my throne, and the earth is my footstool. Where is the house that ye build unto me? And where is the place of my rest? For all those things hath mine hand made, and all those things have been, saith the Lord. But to this man will I look, even to him that is poor and of a contrite spirit, and trembleth at my word. When he says to looking to somebody who's poor, he's not talking about financial means. He's talking about somebody who has spiritually emptied themselves to come to the full conclusion that, God, if I'm not walking in step with you, I'm nothing to me, I'm nothing to anybody else, but God, I need you. I depend upon you. Now remember the Beatitude, and every one of them starts with the same word, blessed or blessed, which means happy. So Jesus literally says, pardon me, happy are the poor in spirit. Happy are the humble and contrite. Happy are the bankrupt before God. Happy are those that are completely empty. You know why they're happy? Because when you show up before God empty, He fills you up. He fills you up with things this world can't fill you up with. He satisfies you with things you can't find anywhere else. And that's why He says that the truly happy people in God's kingdom and in God's economy are those that have emptied themselves. Let me read to you just briefly from Psalm chapter 34, or Psalm 34, and verse number 18. Psalm 34, David says this, "The Lord is nigh unto them that are of a broken heart, and saveth such as be of a contrite spirit." Somebody might say, Pastor, how in the world can I be happy when I'm brokenhearted? That doesn't make any sense. But I'm telling you, when we come to Him broken, we get to experience the work of the Master Healer. And He gives us hope. And in His hope, we can find true abiding happiness. Now, for every one of these Beatitudes, there's a character trait that God expects, and then there's an outcome, a promise of Jesus of that character trait. And here's what it looks like here. Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. I'm going to read that. I'm going to quote that last part again. For theirs, who's they? The poor in spirit, right? For theirs is the kingdom of heaven. So in other words, those that are poor in spirit possess as a current possession the whole kingdom of God. It's yours. Not in ownership, but in fellowship. You say, preacher, why do you say not in ownership? Well, because in the next chapter, and we'll deal with it when we get there, but Jesus is teaching His disciples how to pray. And one of the things He teaches them to pray to the Father, for thine is the kingdom. Make no mistake about it, that's ownership. That's acknowledging that this is His kingdom. But here's the good thing. When you empty yourself and come to Him, then as a current possession, you get to fellowship in the kingdom that He owns. And you get full access to it. So much so that Jesus is able to say, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Not like you get part of it or you get to understand a little bit of it here and there, but it's your kingdom. You can claim it. And as a matter of fact, the poor in spirit gladly and readily claim the kingdom as their own, because if you've emptied yourself of everything else, you're happy to possess the greatest kingdom that's ever been or ever will be. It means more to you than anything. So listen carefully. So here's where let's make sure we're all on the same page, and then we'll wrap this up, all right? So here's where we're at. Blessed, happy are the poor in spirit, the broken, the emptied out. Those that say, I must be utterly and completely dependent upon God in my life. I'm not depending on material things. I'm not depending on worldly things. I don't need to have this or that to make me happy. But we could even say it like this: everything that I own is a resource for the use in God's kingdom. That's how important the kingdom is to the poor in spirit. Because it's theirs and it's everything they have. Everybody with me on this? Okay. So blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. So what does that look like? Well, I'm going to give you two sides of the same coin here from my own personal experience. I'm going to tell you about two men. One of you I'm going to give their name, the other one I'm not. The one I'm not going to give his name is because he's still alive and I didn't ask if I could talk about him. So I'm going to tell you about him, but I'm not going to tell you who it is. The other one's already with the Lord. I'll talk about him, even though I didn't ask him either. He's okay with it. So here's the first man, the unnamed man. In the mid-1970s, this man graduated with a Bachelor of Science degree and then went ahead to get his master's from Penn State University in business and marketing. And he was hired by the Corning Incorporated Corporation and began to get his feet wet in business in the mid-70s and worked for Corning up until the early 80s. In the early 80s, there were some other companies that were kind of noticing the kind of business mind and prowess that he had. And so he was hired by Aramark Corporation. This was before they were Uniform Services, as they're known globally for at this point. But he was hired by Aramark, and as a vice president of finance, he took the Aramark Corporation from about $9 million in annual revenue to somewhere in the $1.3 billion of annual revenue through cost analysis and different things that God just gifted him in and things like that. And so then, after working for Aramark for, I think, about 12 years in different capacities, there was another little mom and pop business that picked him up to revolutionize their business platform and their finances. And that company was called Fruit of the Loom. And Fruit of the Loom hired him as their senior vice president and CFO. And when I met this man, he was the vice president of CFO. Now let me say something about this executive vice president of Fruit of the Loom. I said vice president of CFO. That's not a thing. He was the vice president and CFO of Fruit of the Loom. Let me tell you, I knew him for a year and a half before I knew that's what he did for a living. This wasn't the kind of guy that was going around going, hey, I'm the CFO of Fruit of the Loom. I just wanted you to know. Family lived in a nice but modest house. Drove minivans. On more than one occasion, gave vehicles to people. By the time he left Fruit of the Loom, he went to another company and then today is retired. And after he retired, this is what he did. He drove a church van picking up bus kids and refugees and elderly people to bring them to church. CFO of Fruit of the Loom, driving a church van, bringing people to church. And I'll tell you why. Because in the years that I knew this man, he was a happy man. But I can promise you this. The happiness didn't come from anything that was in a bank account or any kind of sense of accomplishment in the business world or anything like that. He was a man who loved the Lord and wanted to serve Jesus. Not a perfect man, no doubt, but a humble family that looked for opportunities to take the resources that God had blessed them with and be a blessing to other people in the kingdom of God with what God had done. Let me tell you about another man. This man's name was Sam Hazel. Sam Hazel is another man that I grew up with. And him and his wife didn't have two nickels to rub together. A very reduced fixed income, lived in like a government-assisted residential housing development. This man would take whatever leftover pocket change and spending money he had at the end of a month and buy bags of candy. And every time he came to church, he had individually wrapped candy like Jolly Ranchers and things like that in his pockets. And pretty soon there'd be a group of kids standing around Sam Hazel just staring up at him, not saying a word. And Sam Hazel would say, "You're here for a piece of candy, aren't you?" And he'd reach in his pocket and pull out a piece of candy and give it to the kids, and they would take it and run off. I think maybe 1 out of 10 would come back to say thank you. I think that's the right biblical ratio or something like that. But that was Sam Hazel. After Sam Hazel died, I found out that even apart from his wife's knowledge, he had been slipping a couple dollars here, a couple dollars here of his very limited income and hiding it. I don't remember, but I think it might have been in a nightstand or under a mattress or something like that to help kids go to youth camp in the summer. But Sam Hazel was one of the happiest mans I ever saw and didn't have hardly anything. Let me just tell you, being poor in spirit has nothing to do with what your financial situation is in life. It has everything to do with your spirit. It has everything to do with your attitude about life. It has everything to do with the full understanding that I'm empty without Him. I have nothing without Him. I am nothing without Him. But with Him, I have the kingdom. With Him, I am fellowshipping with Him in His kingdom. And I look forward to the advancement of that kingdom, and I want to help advance that kingdom, and I want to be a blessing to others who are in that kingdom too. And so there's just this life that is full of a joy that can only come from Jesus Christ Himself when we empty ourselves out and God fills us up. And it doesn't matter if you've got 10 cents or you've got $10 million. It doesn't matter if you live in a shack somewhere or if you live in the nicest house in Beverly Hills. It doesn't matter. What matters is this, that we have the right attitude before God to say, God, I am nothing without You. God, I want to thank You for Your blessings, because without them, I wouldn't have anything. God, I want to thank You for the opportunity to help some people, because without You, I would need the help. And sometimes even with Him, you need the help. Because we learn how to be abased and we learn how to abound. Sometimes in the kingdom we get to be the giver, and sometimes we get to be the receiver. But to possess the kingdom is what life is really all about. To live every day for the kingdom is what life is really all about. And you don't get to know that if you don't empty yourself. I'll give you a poem. I've quoted it before and you've heard me say it. Probably, if you have, bear with me. If you haven't, here it is. It's anonymous, which means I don't know who to give the credit to for, but I say that so you know the credit doesn't go to me. I didn't write this. One by one, God took them from me, all the things that mattered most, till I was empty-handed. Every glittering toy was lost. So I walked earth's highways grieving in my rags and poverty, until the Savior whispered, lift those empty hands to me. So I raised my hands toward heaven, and He filled them with a store of His own transcendent riches till they could contain no more. And at last I comprehended with my ignorant mind and dull that God couldn't pour His riches into hands that were already full. Here's what Jesus is asking us to do. Just empty ourselves. And just come to Him broken and contrite and saying the truth. Ready for the truth? Don't look at me like, Pastor, you don't know if that's the truth about me. No, I do know the truth about you. I'm going to tell you the truth about you because it's the truth about me too. God, I'm nothing. God, I'm a mess. But God, you said to come to you. And that you'd pick up the pieces. And that you'd put them together. And like clay in the hands of a potter, you could fashion something. So God, I come to you as an empty vessel. Fill me with what you will. And sometimes God takes a vessel like that and He fills it with resources that He knows that somebody can be responsible with to help in His kingdom. And sometimes He never fills that vessel with earthly resources, but He fills that vessel with encouragement, and He fills that vessel with His love. And one thing that He's always promised to fill any empty vessel that's presented to Him with is the fullness of His joy. And I'm telling you, you come to Him broken, but you don't live your life that way. You come to Him contrite, but you live your life whole. Possessing His kingdom and serving the King. And there's no life like it. Let's bow our heads and close our eyes tonight. Lord, would you please bless this invitation?